Okay, it's going to mute now. Okay, Stephen, I believe we are live.
We're live and I've muted, so there should be no feedback.
Excellent.
Not of the wrong sort.
It should be fine. Everything's going to be all right. And I'm sharing both my screens, so we're side by side. That's a mistake I've made before. So let me first of all say hi to everybody out there who's around watching, and everybody who might watch later on. Obviously it's middle of the night in some places, or early in the morning, so some people watch later on. Thank you, Steve. So we are going to talk about croquet life, and I honestly can't think of a better person to chat about than to you. You are, I don't know, croquet rule, you got to tell the world, just player, you are mentor, you are coach, grade 3 coach, you're on several different committees, laws, tournament championship referee, and the
sound is struggling.
And I think I've got issues. Very sad. Okay, we could be back. Right, this could get interesting. We're back. We are now back. Sorry, folks, I have internet issues. Not great timing, but we'll persevere. So I was explaining that Stephen is not just a player of croquet. He is, well, quite frankly, ambassador for croquet, but player, mentor, grade 3 coach, referee on several committees, vice president of the CA, and was general secretary of the WCF. And there's probably many more things that you do for our sport. But let's start with why do you do so much?
I fell into croquet like so many people. It happened completely by accident. I was at Cambridge and I played croquet in the big doubles competition they have every summer called Cuppers in my first summer, which was 73, and it wasn't at all enjoyable. My partner and I had no idea what we were doing. We got beaten by a pair who I later realized were playing something like a 4-ball break. And so I decided I wouldn't take any more interest in the game. And so the next summer, I didn't enter Cuppers. And it was only the intervention of a friend who wanted to occupy one of the better sets of rooms in the college in our joint third year, and knew you had to apply in the June of the year before. And so he was waiting on the appropriate doorstep of the bursar's office to apply for this room, and lied through his teeth to say that I had agreed to join him. So he rushed off to get me to agree to that, which I did. And we went round to see the room and its incumbents 2 days later. And one of them said, well, by the way, one of you has to be the secretary of the Emmanuel College Croquet Club. Oh, said he, well, I don't play it, it better be you then. And that is literally how it got started. There was a big box in the porch of the set of rooms. It had a book called Croquet by a man called J.W. Solomon. I read it, couldn't understand it, had to read it 2 or 3 more times before I began to gather what he was on about. And then the real breakthrough, if you like, was that I had a car, a Fiat 500. And I had shown a modicum of interest in the very small Cambridge University Croquet Club. And on the strength of that, I got a call at 11:30 one Saturday evening in June 1975, asking if I could take a team down to Colchester the following morning. And I did have a car, didn't I? Which was the key question. So I did. And one of those players was a man called Keith Wiley, who was back at Cambridge for a postgraduate law degree. He'd read mathematics, I think, about 5 years earlier. And I ended up playing with him. And I couldn't, again, understand what on earth he was doing, but it was apparently a thing called a triple peel. But he laid up a break for me, and I staggered round to 4-back and came off the court feeling very sort of pleased with myself and said, "Wasn't that great?" "No," he said. "You ran every hoop for about 4 yards and had to hit 7-yard roquets after every one. You've got to be a lot more accurate than that if you're to be any good at all." So I was thoroughly sort of crushed. But then the next break I did, which again he set me up for, I made a slightly better fist of. But from that, basically, I realized there was far more to the game than I'd thought. And I found out through reading this book called Croquet by John Solomon, there was an international side to it. And I'd had visions of playing Walker Cup golf, which were completely ridiculous, as I was playing off 10 at the age of 20. But croquet just looked like a much better option. And that's duly what happened. And I ended up going out to Australia with my wife, Sarah, in 1982, had the most fabulous time. I had more steak in the first week than I'd ever done in my life, as it was as cheap as chips there. And indeed, Keith Wiley was on that tour, because Nigel Aspinall, who was perhaps the greatest player of that era, had decided not to play because it was too far. It was too far for him. And Keith said he was shocked that we were sending such a weak team, and it would be an insult to our hosts. So he said, "I will play." And the CA said, "Oh, thank you, Keith. Yes, you can play." And he was #1 throughout, and ended up by scoring the winning point in a most dramatic match against Neil Spooner in Melbourne. But it did give rise to one of 2 lovely Keith stories. He was something of a wine snob. And of course, he was in 7th heaven in Australia, as they then as now had a wonderful wine industry. And if Keith had a chance, he'd always dive into the nearest winery and go to the cellar gate and sample the wines and express his opinions. And we found out that Australia were pioneers of wine boxes, and they'd just begun to produce them. And as the main form of eating out was to go to some sort of place which was a do-it-yourself barbecue and bring your own wine, David Openshaw, being a Lancastrian, was always keen to save a bob. And so he bought a wine box, and Keith was absolutely horrified. "I can't drink that stuff. It's petrol, it's vinegar." And so David worked out quite a nice little joke to play on Keith. He found a bottle of something quite decent, and he filled it with wine from the wine box and managed to get the cork back in. And so he made a play at one of our evening meals. I think we'd just beaten Australia, in fact. And he pulled out the cork with a pop, said, "Keith, in view of our great triumph, would you please give us your opinion of this?" And so he poured a glass of wine, and Keith took it and reverently sniffed it and swirled it round and supped it and said, "Oh, yes, this is a really good wine. Obviously, a great way to celebrate our win." "Good," said David. "And by the way, it came from this," and held up the wine box. Keith was not terribly pleased.
That's cruel. Yeah. That's cruel.
But it was a wonderful tour. We were quite a young team, actually, average age well below 35. And the way we were looked after by the Australians was absolutely wonderful. And it was the last of the long tours. No one could afford to spend 6 weeks away from home if the teams were now of working age people. And so all future tours were less. And of course, now they're down to just over, well, they're about 3 weeks, which some people still feel is too long. And I must admit, I can understand why. But that was my introduction to international croquet. There was no international singles events at all until 4 years later, when John McCulloch, who was the guy who co-authored The World of Croquet with me in 1988, was in having a sort of very late gap year in his 20s. He didn't know what to do with his life, so he went traveling. And he went to California, and he met Bryce Jones, who owned the Sonoma-Cutrer winery. And in one of the finest pieces of advocacy I can ever imagine, he persuaded Bryce not to put down 4 tennis courts, but to put down 2 croquet courts, as Bryce wanted to have a big charity do every summer and wanted to have some sporting event to give the clients, the punters, something to look at. And he chose croquet. And I think we should all be very grateful indeed to Bryce for doing it for 18 years. From 1986 to 2004, and to John for getting him to do it in the first place. And for many of us, it became an absolutely wonderful week. You were very largely paid for, free tickets to go from London to San Francisco, free accommodation. You paid a reasonably stiff entry fee, but frankly, you were getting so much for that. It was a wonderful bargain. And I think it made a great deal of difference to people's interest in playing international croquet. You met people that you only heard of before. I mean, I can still remember the extraordinary excitement of that first evening of the 82 tour, when I actually met people like Joe Hogan and Paul Skinley and John Prince, who I'd merely heard of as names. And there was no opportunity apart from the MAC then to go abroad. And I think one of the great changes has been over the past 30 years has been the eruption of croquet in all sorts of countries. And of course, other major changes too, such as the development of much more efficient mallets, more aggressive tactics, younger players playing, easier courts, and of course, above all, golf croquet taking over from AC, and in my view anyway, completely saving the game from probably a rather sticky end. And if it wasn't for GC, a great many clubs wouldn't be in existence today. As it is, it's giving us some amazing contests, and I sadly exited the British Open semi-finals at the hand of a young Australian who should have better things to do with his time. But then Robert Fletcher went on to inflict the first ever 7-0 defeat on Reg Bamford before winning the final, with a display which I don't think I've ever seen bettered by anybody, including the likes of Ahmed Nasser and Ahmed Elmadi. So golf croquet has come of age, if you like, as the main form of the game. But I do hope very much that AC remains a very sort of popular second version, which a lot of the good GC players will find, and do find, is a very attractive way of spending time on a croquet lawn, because you're able to express the sort of creative or artistic side of yourself by trying peeling breaks.
So I've got to ask, which is your favourite?
Neither. I enjoy both. They appeal to 2 different parts of my personality. Golf croquet is complete, mortal combat. You're out there to beat the other guy or woman. And AC, I tend to regard the opponent as a very nice person who will put the balls on the court for me, and then I can start playing with them. Now, sometimes I'm the one putting the balls on the court for him or her, and they play with them. But nonetheless, with AC, the thrill of trying a sextuple, especially when you're not as good as people like Bamford and Fulford at finishing them, it gives me a huge amount of excitement. And if it actually finishes, that's so fantastic. And the only rival piece of excitement I've had is the version of association croquet, which I think should become the one which all the very best players play. And that's not super advanced. It's called peel croquet, which an amazing American called Howard Sozin developed, and which I helped to refine a bit. And I'd ask anyone who cared about playing AC on easy lawns but getting interest out of it to speak to people like Jamie Birch and Paddy Chapman, who contested the first final of the Peel Croquet event, which Howard ran a few years ago. And the fun they had, and the fun I had, seeing my croquet strokes improve over a week as I played this game, and the thinking you had to do, it was wonderful. You really had to think hard. And frankly, with AC, I can do it more or less, if not in my sleep. But certainly there's very little in AC which is new to me now. But peel croquet is just fabulous. And I think if we kept ordinary AC for players who haven't got to scratch handicap, because they get a huge amount of fun of getting the innings, losing it, getting it back again, and they win by margins like 26-19, where everyone's had a huge amount of fun and an involvement in the game. But we're going to have the AC Worlds and the AC Opens in the next fortnight, and frankly, in easy conditions, it'll be a shooting contest. And for those who care to, they can try to win with sextuples rather than triples. But, AC, which was the game that I grew up with, it was meant to be played on bad lawns or very fast lawns. And now that the lawns are generally quite easy, it makes it's so difficult for the good players to break down, which means it's not too interesting for the opponent who can read the paper.
So sorry, that is Ben not going to sleep. Sorry, everybody. Diana is here watching, and she says Reg was seen on Roehampton lawns practicing the day after the Open and his loss to Fletcher.
I'm very pleased to hear it. I think he knows the challenge that he faces.
Yeah, well, we were going to talk about Robert Fletcher, because haven't you nabbed him as a doubles partner?
We go back quite a long way. I played in the 2008 Australian Open, and I've been warned about this young chap who's apparently 14. So there's me thinking I'm going to meet some sort of tiny kid who's not as big as his mallet. And there's this fairly hulking 6-footer with a lovely personality and a great sense of humor, but with this extraordinary maturity in both his personality and his play. And he beat me in the quarterfinal. And I'd realized, having seen him play in the earlier round, that he knew how to handle a mallet. But the triple he did against me in game 2 is one which was quite staggering, given that his only source of information on tactics was the Oxford side, because he was part of a farming family living in the outback, basically, about, 100 miles to the west of Melbourne. There's not much there. It's a place called Lismore. And his father had got him and his elder brothers, next younger brother, Malcolm, to play something. And croquet was what he chose for them. And they became very good. And the delayed triple that Robert did included completely not caring about not having a pioneer at 2-back. He just put the pioneer 4 feet south of Penult on the west, peeled gently through Penult after making one back, picked up a short rush to 2-back, rushed it to about 2 feet in front, and carried on, making the whole thing look as interesting as eating your lunch. And it was just such a professional way of doing it. And the only time he sort of showed any signs of being 14 was that he reached the final against Pete Landry, who was then as now a very experienced and canny player. And he took a ball he got to 4-back to the peg, which was a mistake because Pete got in and pegged him out, and Robert hadn't quite worked out how to play the pegged out game. But, since then, when time has allowed, because he and his brother Malcolm have built up a successful business in Australia, he won the World Championship in 2013 without dropping a game at the age of 20, youngest person ever. And I think what impressed everyone on Sunday, and certainly me playing him in the morning, was how well he hit the ball. I mean, his hit rate in game 1 was 93%, which is frankly embarrassingly good. And poor old Reg, I never use that phrase about Bamford, poor old Reg, but that's what I felt for him, because he was just being hammered. And he's a great player. And I think now he's got his business developed. Hopefully he'll have enough time for croquet, because people like that and his brother Malcolm, if they do have the time, can do a lot to inspire standards there. And I think that's really important.
So when you're on the lawn with him, are you gonna get him to do the push-ups as well?
No, everyone has their own style. I don't see Robert reflect himself on the ground. I do it because it helps me. These days it's a nice rest. But
how does it help you? We all want to know. It's
very simple. From the word go, when I wanted to do triples as soon as I can walk, more or less, in some croquet terms. And lining up balls is really important. And I couldn't understand how anyone could do it by standing up. So I just got down onto the ground, and being, fairly small and nimble then, it was no effort. And I could line up the sides of the balls and make sure that if I was doing a peel, they were pointing the right amount inboard of the near upright for the pull that I required. And frankly, it worked. And lining up, angled hoop hoop shots is even more basic. You want the relevant side of the ball to miss the near upright by nothing. Interestingly, thing I found out about Robert on Sunday, I asked, why do you put your mallet down before you run an angled hoop? And he does it by simply finding the spot between the uprights he thinks he has to run the ball over, given the angles he's got. Well, it seems to work for him, but I can't see him taking up my method, and I won't be taking up his. So it's horses for courses, really.
So how does a player develop their own methods? When did that happen?
I mean, croquet is an incredibly individual game. And unlike golf, which is its big brother, if you like, there's no professional coaching. So you have to be an individualist who works out your own salvation. I think that's why the best players in the history of the game have been people who've solved their own problems. And you can get coaching, and it can be very, very helpful, but you've fundamentally got to realize what isn't working and just trial and error. It's the most basic scientific method there is. Find out what works, try and understand why it's working if you can. And failing that, just find out what works and stick with it. And for me,
and then if it doesn't work out why it doesn't work, I guess.
Yes, or try something else. But don't be content with doing the stuff that doesn't work. But in many ways, I mean, croquet is not that difficult a game. Tempo is a huge thing. If you can persuade yourself to swing the mallet back with reasonable dignity and then manage the transition from backswing to forward swing in a calm fashion, and then start the downswing slowly and then accelerate, you should be okay. But croquet is competitive. It's a pressure situation. People want to get pressure out of the way as fast as they can. I play golf to a handicap of 9, which means I'm pretty average. And I can see, if you like, it's valuable for me. I can see what it's like to be an average croquet player quite easily, because I can see what I'm like as an average golfer. And the mistakes we make are snatching at the top of the backswing. And if you do that, a golf ball has the most wonderful ability to show you embarrassingly how bad you've hit it. It goes about 50 yards to the left or right. In croquet, you don't get quite such big misses, but in GC at the top level in particular, if you aren't hitting well, and your opponent is hitting well, your chances are approximately 0.
I like that. I know that you have a little book of errors. Yeah, it's. I think most. There's the sort of average person has a little red book. You have the little book of errors, croquet errors.
Now I have a little black book, which is the name of everyone who I've ever lost to goes into. And then I make sure that I beat them at some time. There are 3 people, by the way, who I will never beat because they did the indecent thing and died before I had a chance to do it.
How rude.
But that was in the early stages of my career. No, I mean, I've lost to lots of people and beaten lots of people. And the best players I've lost to more often than I've beaten, but I've had some wins. And it's always fun to know that you can do that.
The only reason I know about this little book is because we once played and you made a little bit of an error. You won the game, so it doesn't feature highly in your book, I'm sure, but it was a small error, and you told me I'm going to write that one down so that I don't do it again, and I'm fascinated.
That's it.
There it is. But does it work?
Yes.
I mean, not make the mistake again?
No, well, losing has some upsides. The one thing I learned, and having played the game for a long time, the fundamental thing you learn is don't get upset with yourself. You have to be your own biggest fan all the time. But if you win something, you'll suffer from winner's amnesia. You might have played rubbish. The other person played even more rubbish, which is why you won. But you won't remember all that much. But I have driven back from finals that I've lost and been able to analyze to my heart's content why things went, what I could have done better. And it's that constant learning. I mean, the moment that you stop learning should be the moment you draw your terminal breath. And until then, there's still stuff to get better at. And I love the learning process. I make mistakes all the time. I learn from them. I forget lessons that I learned and have to remember them. But, the sense of moving forward is what really makes competitive sport of any sort worthwhile. And for me, I still get the needle before a match, still feel nervous, But the moment you strike the first ball, that seems to drop away, and you're into the battle. And in golf croquet, you spend the early few shots working out what your opponent's capable of on that particular day. You may know them well, but they vary. Everyone does. They may be a brand new opponent, in which case it's really interesting. What are these people capable of? You might have found out a bit about them beforehand. And in AC, I always like to know if someone does triples or not, because if they do, that might affect how I choose to play if I hit in. Very good rule is don't do a TPO against someone who can't do a triple, because it's a bit of a waste of time, especially if you make a mess of it. And in GC, find out what they're feeling like taking on as hoops. If you get a chance to run the first hoop from 6 or 7 yards, take it on. Not because you're guaranteed to get it, but you'll frighten them witless if they realize that's what you think is the right thing to do. And there's nothing better than an opponent who is feeling slightly nervous and is then being shown that you want to try and win in the most direct way possible. Equally,
quite scary, really, aren't you?
Yeah, well, not really, no, but it's just I've managed to make so many mistakes in my career. I have learned a few things as well, and winning is a technique, and you can give yourself the best chance of doing it. It won't always happen, and I think the most important lesson I learned was to stop worrying about mishaps, as I call them. Mishaps happen. Life goes on. The great thing about competing is it's asymmetric. The upside of winning is wonderful. It's great. The downside of losing, pretty trivial, really. You're the only person who cares. No one else gives a monkeys. And if from that losses you can learn a few useful lessons and not make mistakes in the future, then you've gained something. So I feel sorry for those who get really uptight. I know people do, but they really shouldn't. I mean, I used to when I was younger. My wife made 2 trips to Jake's in Thornton Heath because I'd chucked a mallet in the air in frustration at missing a hoop and failed to catch it. And I can tell you that a wooden shafted Jake's mallet does not like landing on the ground. So, but I'm now somewhat older and wiser. And
before we go back to the croquet, because you have mentioned the lovely Sarah, I am going to put out there a big thank you from me and from the rest of the community, the croquet community, to Sarah for just being amazing. How on earth she's done it for the last nearly 50 years, I don't know. She's not just I know that she's an amazing support to you, and she comes along, and sometimes she's at the lawns and sometimes she'll go and do her own thing. But the amount of people that have got married, had children, they've gone away from the game, some maybe come back to the game, but there's not many that get to continue to play at the level that you have been able to play at. And I think that she might be one to thank for it.
She's been immensely long-suffering. And I was incredibly selfish, really, to want to keep on playing. I did cut down the amount that I played, but I had this great fear if I stopped for a couple of years, I'd be no good when I returned. And to be honest, croquet is not my life. I realized early on that it was a wonderful competitive recreation which would form an adjunct to having a fairly busy business career, having a family. And it was just a complete pressure release. And later I got involved with local politics. And so I've just regarded it as a really wonderful way of relaxation. And the reason why I think I kept at it was because the people in it were 99.99% of the time absolutely fantastic. It's a very friendly sport. And you can be good friends with people who you're trying really hard to hammer into the ground, croquet-wise, and you have a drink with them afterwards, and the winner pays, which is very important. But no, I've been incredibly lucky. I've met people all over the world. I've now managed to make it 20 countries where I've competed. And
that's amazing. 20 countries.
And the experience is always the same. Friendliness and enthusiasm, and to come across that is a very pleasing and energizing feeling, and it makes you want to keep on doing it.
But it's fantastic to know that croquet is being played in 20 countries. A lot of us don't realize that. We think of sort of the 4 main or 5, 6 main countries, and then sort of forget about, you know, there's maybe the smaller ones. Or so I think it's amazing for the sport, and well done you for traveling the distance and encouraging those croquet those places to keep their croquet going.
I wouldn't claim that I've done much of that beyond turning up, and obviously
that helps. That is going to encourage them. You know, when someone like of your standard turns up, that says to them, actually, this is worth it. We've got this person here. This is great. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's incredible. I do want let's just go back to making friends. Now, when you play in the AC Open Championship, the doubles, which is coming up in a minute now, you'll be playing with Robert Fletcher, and he's obviously on form. But you're on the other end, so you're seed number 1. Seed number 2 are 2 teammates. So Samir and James Deeth, they are at the other end. Now, if seeding goes to plan, you meet them in the final. What's it like meeting your teammates in a final? You've got to switch from, I'm going to support these guys, to
no. So
attack.
Team play and individual play, or doubles play, in a tournament like the Open Doubles Championship are just chalk and cheese. If I'm playing with people, they'll have no greater supporter than me. If I'm playing against them, they'll have no greater enemy than me on the croquet court. It's as simple as that. I honestly, I never care who I play. I can't control the draw anyway. And so if Robert and I should happen to get to the final, and that's not a given at all, but if we did, and frankly, who turns up will be of mild interest, but it'll be up to us to try and hit in and go round and all that sort of stuff. No, I mean, I have never had the slightest problem in differentiating between playing in a team, teammates. No, well, that's fine. Everyone has multiple, if you like, personalities, and you can be a teammate, you can be an opponent, you can be a doubles partner, you can be a fellow committee member, you can be, someone that is coaching you, or you're coaching them, or someone you're examining to be a referee. You just take the situation that you're looking at and deal with that on its own terms. So, if I'm playing, I'll be hoping Robert is in top form while we're the doubles pair. And if I should by some chance meet him in the singles, I hope to goodness that, I do better than him.
And he's no longer on top form.
Well, I wouldn't dream of wishing ill on my opponents, but I'm not going to burst into tears if they miss a croquet by a couple of millimeters.
Oh, interesting comment from Annabelle, who's along with us. She says, will it be alternate stroke doubles?
Haven't thought about it. Lovely question, though. Thank you.
Interesting. On that subject, what do you think about alternate stroke? I love it personally.
Oh, look, I'm just ashamed of the fact that it didn't dawn on us much earlier than it did. It was a wonderful way of getting newcomers to understand what a 4-ball break is. I've used it myself. I've coached down at Duncton, Rother Valley Croquet Club, and it was just, I went away feeling almost cross that this totally obvious technique had not become commonplace decades earlier, because I got a couple of ladies who had not a clue to say, oh, now we understand what it's about. They couldn't play croquet strokes to save their lives at that stage, but they could hit the ball a bit. And before long, I mean, we were just repairing croquet strokes, and they were seeing how the pattern evolved, and it just made it, you learn by doing almost far better than almost any other way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great shame we didn't tumble to ASD 30 years ago, to be honest, 40 years ago. But we do now, and I think if you're of comparatively equal standard, and playing a pair who are not of equal standard, then you'd be a mug to choose ASD. As I remember playing you and David, and you realised afterwards that, of course, he was able to make up for your few minor imperfections, whereas if you'd been on your own, we might have had more of a chance. So
yeah, it's true. It is true. He fixes.
Yeah, he's very good at it. Very good.
He's very good at fixing. So let's talk about refereeing, because we mentioned it a minute ago about, and I've said to you previous to this, I advocate for up and coming players, especially, to go on a referee's course, to the laws course or the rules course. It helps your own game no end. But there's this huge thing which I have suffered with, and I know many other people have, where you become a referee, you're a new referee. It's very exciting. And you're at the first tournament that you referee and you are scared out of your wits, because what if you actually get called on, let's say, to referee someone like yourself or Reg, or, you know, I don't know, just the good players. And you, I don't know, it's scary thinking you might have to fault somebody. That's not even having to fault somebody. That's just thinking about it. What's the advice? What's your advice?
Look, you're providing a service which the game needs, and that's very important. And any good player worth their salt will appreciate your position and just wants you to give a decision. And if you decide that, you know, using the rules, that it's more likely than not that the event that shouldn't have happened did happen, like a double tap, then you just say so. And the idea that you'll get grief from these players is very sad, because you won't. It's actually, and indeed, I'd have absolutely no hesitation in differentiating between refereeing a fellow referee and someone who isn't a referee. And I have said to Reg that his skill as a player is only matched by his lack of knowledge of the rules, which he, with great grace, accepts has got some truth in it.
He does.
And I mean, this is a shame that some of our very best players have never chosen to become referees. I was put on the spot fairly soon after I became involved in the game in the late 70s. I'm told, you should become a referee. You're getting a lot out of the game. You should put something back in. And equally, I was told you should go onto the council, because, you know, players of your age will probably be in the game for quite some time. I didn't quite realize then quite how long I'd be in it, but still. And and you know, I've never found contributing through giving my opinion a great problem. As my wife would say, I have my opinions far too often. But serving on committees, having an effect sometimes, it's been no effort. And I think with refereeing, I enjoy training referees now, particularly because the GC rules have been designed very deliberately to be relatively easy to almost memorize, let alone understand and use. You know, all the common situations have got pretty straightforward treatments. And the whole idea about GC is that no one's trying to use the rule book to their advantage. The game will be won by who hits the ball better on the day, who runs more hoops, who makes more clearances, who positions better. If something goes wrong, typically a wrong ball, the approach of the GC rules is to get the game restarted reasonably fairly as quickly as possible, because you want to win the game by playing, not by consulting a little red book. AC is a bit different, because AC suffers from the fact that at the top level in particular, one mistake, one change of innings can determine the entire match. And that does put a lot of pressure, much more pressure, I would say, onto an AC referee than onto a GC referee. You know, frankly, so much stuff happens in the average game of GC, so many mistakes. Who cares if one referee decision is slightly dodgy? Well, who knows for certain? Although as we bring in cameras, that will hopefully reduce even those dodgy ones to a very, very tiny proportion.
I saw you use your phone to referee a shot just the other day, actually.
Yep. And in fact, I'll be posting it. We're about to start a new WhatsApp group for GC referees all over the world, where basically these little clips can be posted. And it's actually quite a nice one. It was Rod Ashwell playing a hampered, slightly downward shot, and you see a nice bit of jump, which shows that it was a clean shot. And I actually called it clean to myself before looking at it, and then was pleased to see that the slow motion bore out that he had indeed got a nice little bit of, proper downward movements, but he didn't squeeze the ball into the turf. It actually hit the turf and bounced a fraction.
Okay, so the WhatsApp group, is that just for referees or who?
Yes, yeah. Anyone who's it'll be launched in the next couple of weeks probably. Begonia Elzeburu, who is a very sort of leading light in the Spanish croquet, and she was the one who pioneered the use of smartphone cameras, and she's amazingly good at it, and it's now commonplace in Spain. And it means it takes quite a lot of the angst out of the opponent, who thinks that their opponent has got into a spot of bother and they've been lucky to escape without being faulted. Well, the truth is, if the referee's been able to look at the clip several times, that's the real advantage. You can look at the same shot as many times as you want and form a much more considered view as to what happened than just having to stand there and form one flash judgment and call out false or fair. And it's not surprising that sometimes people think that you've got it wrong. Now, say in GC, it doesn't matter that much, which is a blessing. But in AC, it's a much more serious matter.
Yeah. Can be very detrimental.
Yes. Oh, I mean, it can take literally. I mean, people lose matches in the World Championship by one missed croquet. It's as finely edged as that. We play best of 5 now in the quarterfinals onwards, just to try and make sure that people have a better chance of equalising. But that's why I think Peel croquet was such a wonderful improvement, because that would certainly find out who the better player was, who deserved to go through to the next round, and probably only one game would be required. How about that?
Do you not think it's complicated though?
Once you get into it, no. Doing it's difficult. Working out where the peel's got to come from, or the leap, and then manoeuvring yourself so you can actually do it. That's the fun. That's when you have to take your croquet strokes to a new level. And
but for there's 8,500 croquet players in England.
I'm being very elitist about preserving AC as an interesting form of the game for the top 50 or 100 in the world, the people who turn up to the World Championship. For them, they want a game where they know they're going to have a chance, no matter who wins the toss, no matter who hits the first shot. Because in Peel croquet, those factors are irrelevant. It's how well you are playing on the day. But playing AC, I might add, this is pure AC, but with a couple of bells and whistles. Yeah. And I mean, I managed a quintuple against Howard Sozin in the first week, and it was done. So it was a standard, if you can call a quintuple standard, but I was obeying the requirement to do a peel every 2 hoops just in order to get this peel finished. And he said afterwards, I was schizophrenic. Half the time I wanted you to break down, but the other time I was delighted in proving that what I'd invented worked. And he should have been far more happy about that. But the trouble is, croquet players are notoriously conservative, and getting them to try something new is a challenge.
It can be, yeah. I'll vouch for that. I've got a question here. So Annabelle says, how far in advance do you start preparing for a tournament? Weeks, days, hours, minutes, and how? And is it different for the 2 codes?
Okay. I've been playing long enough that I can get into sort of battle mode quite quickly. What I do try and do, particularly when driving to the venue, if I'm driving any distance, to use the time in the car as my sort of private preparation session. And just basically, I often listen to appropriate music. My favorite one is the battle scene from Gladiator. And, basically just get into distinctly fugitive mode so that you're going to go out there and, do
battle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't compete just to be there for the view. You're there to try and win. But the great thing is to realize that it is a game, and the world will keep on turning even if you lose. It'll even keep turning if you've played badly, and then go away and think about why you played badly. But with a bit of luck, you'll play well. And if the other person plays even better and wins, the only reaction you can have is to say, well done. And again, try and learn from what they did. I mean, I certainly learned a bit from watching Robert Fletcher at work at the weekend. He's got a wonderfully crisp way of approaching the ball. He's literally walk up to it, one long cast, one short cast, and then hit it. And Reg doesn't cast at all. And Edmund Fordyce, who I happened to be talking to only yesterday, as he's coming to the UK in August, is even quicker. If you seeing Edmund play in the world teams in Nelson in 2020 was an absolute breath of fresh air. He just wanders up to the ball, roughly in line with it, one quick swish over the ball and then bang. And whether it was running a hoop from anywhere between 7 and 10 yards, straight through, he absolutely destroyed Mohammed Karim, who is a very fine player indeed, in the final match, which gave New Zealand the win. But I'll be quite rude, actually. His colleagues, who are very fine players, were casting forever. I mean, I counted one of them doing 32 casts, and he missed the flipping ball. And if you want to kill off golf croquet as a potential television sport, we've got to ban casting or keep it down to about 3, because it's a nightmare to watch people behave like a sort of, there was a clip of a well-known player in this country casting forever. I won't mention names, it would be unfair, but basically they were going a very good imitation of that clip, and I thought it was a pity because Edmund showed you could just wander up to the ball and hit it with incredible accuracy without a huge amount of bother. And
I must admit, I personally find that the more I cast, the worse I get. Because
well, I think there's something in that.
I don't know. I think you almost convince yourself out of it.
Yeah.
By the time you've hit the
much
ball.
harder. The more cast you take, the harder it is to hit the ball with proper acceleration. And that's whereas you go 1, 2, bang, you can hit.
Yeah. So I would. Hang on, I've got another question. Do you do anything to settle your nerves? This is from Diana.
I don't want to sound immodest, but I get the needle, nerves if you like, before a match. But the moment the coin is tossed, they just vanish, and I'm into battle mode. And I mean, I've got the advantage. I've been playing this game for an awfully long time, and I worked out about 25 years ago that getting nervous during a game was pretty pointless. The worst that could happen is that you could lose, and hey ho, you might be lucky and win. And so I believe in playing croquet with a fairly joyful mood, and there's no upside in getting upset if things go wrong. Just try and learn from it and do it better next time.
Do you know, I think I have said this before on different interviews, and I'm bound to say it again because it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Nick Parrish, he always wanders around with a smile on his face, and you talk to him about croquet, and he just says it's a privilege to play.
Well, absolutely right, and that word,
lovely.
One of my big things is about sports psychology, and one thing that all the best players will agree is that pressure is a privilege, not a problem. And there's a wonderful 2012 Olympics YouTube I recommend anyone to look at, by Matthew Syed, who's a Times correspondent. He used to be the #1 British table tennis player, but it's about 15 minutes, if that, and it's an interesting clip, but the best parts are the people like Carl Lewis and the others saying what they think about pressure. And if you should tee off pressure, you should be grateful that you're feeling it. It means you are alive, and you're thoroughly, and you're living intensely. I think the reason why I've stuck with playing competition for so long is that I really feel that I live intensely. It's exciting. And if things go pear-shaped, well, big deal. There's a tournament next week or next week.
Another one.
Yeah, and you can do it better then. And so I think, it is a privilege. I think Nick's absolutely right. And the higher up the game you get, you won't have done it without merit. Believe in yourself and practice a lot. The one advantage I have had, which I appreciate and I'm grateful for, I happen to like practice for its own sake. I went for a clay pigeon shooting lesson, and to the instructor's horror, I just wanted to take the same shot about 150 times. He said, why? I want to get it right, I said. And it's that distinctly autistic approach to practice, which can help, because if you do something long enough, you will get the feel of how to do it right. And if you can bring that back when you need it, and that's, I think, what people like Reg and Robert Fulford and Robert Fletcher, and I mean, the finest ball striker I've seen outside these shores is probably Ahmed El Mahdi at his best. He's a wonderful man. He's a judge in Egypt, fantastically civilized and refined chap, with a grip no one else has tried to emulate. He has his hands completely together with a hole through the middle, and that's where the shaft fits. And he has the end of his shaft built up so his palms fit round it. And I have seen him hit shots which I have never seen anybody else do. And
wow.
So, and he also is someone who you know perfectly well has a very serene approach to the fact of competition. And his finest hour, in my opinion, was when he was basically hammered off the court in 2 games flat in the Egyptian Open one year by a diminutive girl called Pauline Salib, who beat him. Well, the second game was 7-2 because she beat him by running 9 from about 5 yards south and 3 yards angled. And Ahmed, which for an Egyptian man is, it's a pretty tall order to be beaten by a woman, just smiled and said, "Pauline, you were fantastic." I thought that was the most wonderful comment. And
it's lovely. Yeah. It's I have very much enjoyed the company of the Egyptians when they come and play here. I was lucky I got to spend quite a lot of time with them at the GC Worlds last year. And it was great fun to be with them and learn a little bit more about them. So obviously the Worlds is coming up here, the AC Worlds, and you have been world champion before. I assume you're thinking, well, I've done it before, I can do it again.
Well, I treat it like any other tournament. It's a tournament I want to win. Whether I will win, I don't know, but I'll be giving it my best shot. I think we're going to be in very easy conditions. Sextuples will be, I think, important. It was very interesting that last year in the Opens final, James Death chose not to do sextuples and beat Reg 3-1. I wouldn't say easily, but decisively. I'm going to be fascinated to see what people like Fulford and Bamford choose to do, because if you remember, Robert's got over 400 sextuples, Reg over 300. Your dear husband has got 120 something. I've got 111. James Death has got about 90. Robert Fletcher hasn't got very many, but we know he can do them. And depending how easy the hoops are, and I suspect they are going to be easy despite the best efforts of the Hurlingham ground staff, because absent a drought, the silt that forms the base to the Hurlingham courts and on the front anyway makes it very difficult to get a hoop that will resist a ball. Whereas in Southwick of late, when the hoops were in the ground, the Atkins were in the grounds first thing in the morning, they were rigid. And you didn't just fail a hoop, you got spat out. And it's the absence of being spat out, I think, that will make people very confident, and they will be trying things. And shooting will be paramount, but once you get in, you should be able to carry on round. So I don't know. I mean, I think sextuples will play their part. And certainly, frankly, I'd much rather lose trying a sextuple than scratch through with a boring triple. That may be my big weakness, but I managed to win the Worlds once, riding my luck with great sort of enthusiasm. But nonetheless, if your chance comes, you're a mug not to take it. I managed to.
I've got a couple more questions. Tom Hartwell asks, how can we get croquet on the BBC?
Change the BBC, would be my advice. I think if golf croquet could be, you had a specialized golf croquet tournament where casting was almost banned, and there were ways of shortening the contest for a hoop, that might work. the quality of cameramanship that's coming is very good. The use of close-ups in both golf and snooker have made a big difference to their watchability, and there's no reason why GC couldn't be treated in the same way.
I think we are starting to get a few more news reports. I mean, it was in the Kent and Sussex news report just the other day. In sort of we're trying to get publicity in the lead up to the women's GC Worlds, which is coming soon. And I think live streaming has helped quite a lot across the board. I mean, we obviously, well, not obviously, but we all watched the Mac live, and the ability to watch it was amazing. It was so great, and I think that has helped lots of people in the sport want to follow their sports. Previously, I don't think a lot of us did. You know, we wouldn't travel to another country to watch a game, but it's now made it, at least internally, more accessible, and I think maybe that might help externally as well. We'll see.
I think GC, unlike AC, does have possible TV potential, but the game probably has to be, or definitely has to be, tweaked a little to make it crisp. I say the excessive casting of 3 of the 4 members of the Kiwi team, who are the current world team champions, was distinct downside. I mean, Sky Sports had a subsidiary there who did a wonderful job in actually filming it, but my goodness, you need to edit out all the flipping casting. And also the point about top class GC, the players get very good at hitting, and that can extend things a lot. I mean, going back to 2011, even when Reg Bamford had his unfortunate encounter with a referee against Hisham Abusba, in the first game they contested hoop 5, just hitting shots across the width of the lawn, and I think it must have been at least 8 hits each, just on and on. And finally Hisham cut Reg sufficiently far north. He actually had something rather longer than a 14-yarder, and he actually missed. But so golf croquet, in its sense, I think at the top the games have become a bit longer because the players are just getting better and better at hitting.
Mm-hmm. Another question. So Red Bowls, whoever Red Bowls is, thank you for joining us. Stephen, what are your favoured practice routines?
Well, in AC, whenever I go onto the court, I roll up to first hoop from the south boundary. It's a very good way of finding out how fast that particular court is on that day. Oh,
hang on a minute. That's warm-up.
Okay, well,
warm-up's different from practice.
Well, for practice, the one thing I would say about practice, always use what's called deliberate practice. Focus on one thing at a time. If you've got, let's say an hour, well, spend a quarter of an hour on each of 4 things. Don't just muck around. I tend to practice these days, and I'm not trying to sound clever, by doing sextuples, because they actually exercise all the skills that I need. The great thing about doing sextuples, even if you can't actually finish them, you learn to rush. You learn to treat a 14-yard rush as standard. Improvement is all about changing your own expectations. And once you start to realize that a shot you regarded last week or last month as very difficult indeed, now you think it's routine, you've made progress. I mean, I always like to quote the quite famous inner game equation that performance equals potential minus interference. And performance is how you can play on a particular day. Your potential is the best you're capable of at that moment. And interference is all the stuff getting into your mind, which is preventing you from playing at your best. Well, the important thing about deliberate practice is that's how you expand your potential. And as you grow that, even if your interference level remains much the same, your performance will actually rise. Now, if you become good at controlling the amount of interference that you suffer, you'll get even better. So the practice routines are in part physical, going after those shots that you're not good at and getting better at them. I mean, a classic one is rolling out of corner 2 to make hoop 2. Now, if you're a golf croquet player, you should get that almost every time, because you just roll out to 2 or 3 yards south and ram it through the hoop, whereas your average AC only player will be getting the collywobbles if he's or she is more than 2 feet from the hoop. Well, you can't afford to take that attitude. And then if croquet strokes aren't if they aren't going well in general, spend 20 minutes playing at the split from 1 to make 2 and 2 and 3, or 3 to roll down to 4 to 5 with a bit of a pass roll. Just do them, because your subconscious learns by doing, seeing what works and what doesn't, and it'll adjust for you. You don't have to do much. My other great tip to people is, if you're trying to, say, improve stop shots around a hoop, get one of those long tape measures, lay it out beside, and play the shot from the same position and see exactly how far in ratio you can get the other ball to go. And the more information you give your subconscious, the faster it will learn to do what you want. So in terms of practice for AC, that's what I do, because you can practice breaks. GC practice, I simply do it by playing a game, blue and black play red and yellow, and I'll often adopt two different personalities. One time blue and black will be Mr. Cautious, and red and yellow will be Mr. Mad, and I'll see who wins. And I don't know who's going to win at the start, so I do have some interest in the outcome, and I quite enjoy being sort of constructively schizophrenic anyway. It's very useful that during a match, if you're taking one particular course of action and you're losing, you'd better change, because it's madness to continue doing the same things and expect a different outcome. And I wouldn't call them sadistic, but some of my most enjoyable wins have been when I completely turned a match around, because I realized I was being stuffed and just changed tactics and approach. And the end result, on some occasions anyway, was a very surprised opponent who managed to lose. And they said, "Why did you change?" I said, "Because you were beating me." And, that isn't a good thing from my point of view. And so you need to practice different styles. I mean,
including being schizophrenic.
Well, yes, of course. Seriously, in GC, you need to have more than one way of hitting the ball. You really do. You've got to have. I have four different grips, four different tempos, and I'll use them. If one isn't working, then I'll chuck it for that game. There's no point in continuing with a style which is not working at that moment, because you're building up a neural chain in your brain, which is just going to, you like failing hoops, do you? I'll continue to give you failing hoops, no problem. So basically change and get out of that rut. And then, the next day you may find that method A, which was letting you down yesterday, is now working fine.
How do you know which one to start a game with?
Oh no, I've got my standard method, which is what I always do start off with, and it's on probation. And and if I'm sort of 4-0 up, well, it's being a good boy, so I'll stick with it. If I'm 4-0 down, hopefully before that, I'll have perhaps made a few changes. But often you have to be serious. Why are you losing? Is it because your positional play is poor? People forget that in GC, at least half the strokes are positional strokes. They're not the wham bam thank you ma'am hitting big clearances and running hoops from exotic distances. It's getting the ball into the right place. And if you're losing because of that, then changing how you hold the mallet is not going to do very much good, unless it actually gets your touch better. But this is why the warm-up in GC is so important. You're actually calibrating your sense of strength so that you can hit the ball from 2 to 3 and make it stop in front of the hoop. And likewise, 8 to 9. Running up from 1 to 2 is a bit, not cruder, but you want to be within a couple of yards. But there's not, to be a yard out, well, you're within a yard of the hoop, that's great, or 3 yards back, that's fine as well. But if you're a yard strong or weak going across from hoop 2 to hoop 3, you've got maybe a hoop you simply cannot afford to run hard, and that makes a big difference. So touch is very important.
If I'm coaching, I often refer to distance or direction or both. And what are you thinking about? And to me, going from 1 to 2, it's essentially more often than not just distance. But going to 2 to 3, you are looking at direction, because your angle, if you're just, ever so just 2 degrees out, you're way out. And then
there's a really good general coaching point to make. In GC, you've got to be comfortable. You've got to regard some length of not less than 2 yards, and preferably 3.5 yards, as your bread and butter hoop. Just practice those until you regard that as a sensible shot to take under all circumstances. And then when you're playing across from 2 to 3 or 8 to 9, give yourself enough room. If you go to be 3 yards back from the hoop, yeah, you're not terribly close, but at least you will almost certainly have a hoop. Whereas if you feel nerves, I must be within a yard, which is a silly thing to do as a goal croquet player, I might add, and you don't quite get it, you're stuffed. So always give yourself, you must put a threat in. You must persuade your opponent that you might run the hoop from where you've put the ball. Whether you do or not, it's a different matter. You may not be able to do it because he knocks you away, but you need to put the threat in. You've not to make them think and worry.
Be menacing.
Yeah, exactly. No, I always want my opponents to be definitely thinking and preferably worried. And occasionally I'm lucky and they get absolutely terrified. That helps. That said in the nicest possible way. I love it when I see someone who is not a great player suddenly having a really good game, because the pleasure they get from playing well. And you say to them, look, you were really brilliant for several hoops. You can do it. Just do it for the whole shebang. And I think once people get confidence that they can be good and they can run hoops from what I call sensible distances, which is 3.5, 4 yards, it opens up the game to them. They can suddenly take a much more bold and enjoyable approach to it. Whereas you watch an awful lot of social GC, and frankly, the ball's hit about 4 yards if it's unlucky. I mean, you've got to play the game with vim. If you're going to clear an opponent, take the Egyptian approach. The furthest corner is the best possible target. Give them 25 yards to come back from. And if you miss, well, tough. But at least you tried.
At least you tried. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining me and everybody that's watching. It's just over the hour, but I allowed a bit more time because it all went a bit wrong at the beginning there. So sorry about that, everybody. I hope everyone's enjoyed our chat today. Stephen, it's just been a pleasure. You're fabulous to talk to. I love your stories, and you're always such a gentleman, and a great opponent, actually. I hate losing to you. I hate it. And now I know that you probably get pleasure out of that as well. I hate it even more. But I
get pleasure out of winning, but I refuse to feel pain when I lose, and I do urge other people to take this.
I'm going to be so much more determined to beat you next time.
Good. Brilliant.
Anyway, well, thank you very much, and I'm going to switch off our live stream and say bye-bye to your followers there.
Well, thank you all very much for watching. I hope it was fun and maybe even occasionally useful, and if it was, that would be great.
Thank you very much. See you guys. And we're